Welcome back for a very special episode. We're sitting down with Ron and Tim Harrop to celebrate our 70th anniversary and listen to some of the stories and milestones of Ron's journey and Harrop's achievements over the last 70 years. Ron, it's fantastic to have you back at the workshop. We've got the iconic Harrop's Howler that a lot of our viewers would recognise, and Tim Harrop, our legendary operations manager, is joining us for something a little bit different on the channel. We're so excited to recognise obviously the 70th anniversary for the business, and you've played such a massive pivotal role in its journey. Let's start with when you started out as a young fella growing up and Len was getting into the business and your passion for cars. How did that all come about?
Oh, it slowly grew. I guess I first started on push bikes and billy carts and that sort of thing, model aeroplanes, and building them in the middle of the night using glue, and that's probably what kept me awake all night, not knowing it. But I'd be working away and you could be maybe 5 o'clock in the morning and the birds are starting to sing and think, I probably should get to bed. But I've always interested in designing things, building things, and it started off very early. I don't know why, it's just something that's always piqued my interest.
Did you pull things apart and put them back together and understand how they work? Was that the mechanical side of how the mind was developing?
Yeah, it certainly was. Even model aeroplane engines, 1.5cc diesels and glow plugs and that sort of thing. Yep. You wind the compression up too far on a diesel engine and it'd break the duralium conrod, so you'd have to get on the tram and go into town and buy a new conrod, which was 6 and 6pence or something or other. So.
Yep. And your mum and dad, Len and Elsa, what's the starting point for the business back in 1955?
Prior to 55, Dad had a textile engineering business. He got out of that and wanted to work by himself more on the engineering side, and he started working at home in East Kew for a little while, and then bought a place in Brunswick where he started to build things and semi-trailers, and one of the major projects I was involved in just when I was still doing an apprenticeship was a food mixing machine for a company called Tom Piper, and we built it out in the yard because it wasn't enough room in the workshop, and we had a tarpaulin over the top and a big searchlight so you could see what you were doing underneath.
So when you were growing up in high school, did you always feel destined to join the engineering business?
I guess so. I went to high school and I always thought I should have gone to a tech school. I went to Bourne High School and I used to walk past the sheet metal shop because I was doing woodwork instead of sheet metal, and I used to sort of think, why aren't I doing that? But anyway, I enjoyed the woodwork, and then I went on and did an apprenticeship at Footscray Tech doing boiler making of all things. I guess I was directed that way because Dad wanted me to do that because he was the fitter and turner, and as a team we could do the two things together. So, But I sort of, over the years, gravitated more to the machining, I suppose. I still did the fabrication, but I was more interested in machining.
And around about what time did the passion for cars really start to take hold? Was that as a teenager?
Before cars, it was when I was about 11 years old. I found a book on go-karts. And I thought, this is fantastic. I ended up building one with a Villiers 2-stroke engine out of a James Auto cycle, built it, welded it up before I was 12 or 13, I can't remember, it was one or the other. So,
wow.
And used to take it down the beach at Ocean Grove and blaze up and down. It'd do 80 mile an hour because I ended up changing the Villiers engine for a Jawa 250, which had a 4-speed gearbox. It'd do 80 mile an hour along the beach and clean up the odd seagull. And you could, when the tide was out, you could do a U-turn flat out and spray the sand everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was probably the start of the motive power.
Excellent. And did you finish tech school and join the business with
Oh,
your
I
dad?
was in the business when I started doing the apprenticeship, going to motor race meetings and that sort of thing. I remember going to one with Dad, I reckon it was 1956 Australian Grand Prix that was around Albert Park actually, and I couldn't see much because I wasn't that old at that stage. I seem to remember a bloke called Bob Jane running into hay bales and things in a Maserati 250 or something like that. Went to a few other meetings that Dad took me to, and it sort of just grew from there.
Did Len ever race?
No.
Okay.
No, he was interested and he certainly followed what I was doing, but he never had any desire to do that sort of thing.
So what was your first road car?
A Morris Minor that had it was an 850cc overhead valve engine, but then I took that out and put in an MGTC engine that I'd bored out and chromed everything on it and made extractors for it and put it into this MG, which certainly used to give the FJ FX Holdens a run for their day. So I took it out to the drags one day and it was fast. It did an 18.21, would you believe? But anyway, not fast at all, but for those days it wasn't too bad.
And it sounds like you would have been continually modifying that, looking to extract more performance.
I guess so, yeah. Always looking for something a bit better. But then I bought an EH Holden. It was 11 months old when I bought it. And then I started to do the same thing to it. Hotted it up and put triple SUs on it and took a bit off the cylinder head and extractors and all those sort of things.
Was that Holden 6, like a 186
yeah,
or a 202?
179.
179.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the end, as a road car, it had 228 horsepower. And I'm led to believe when Norm Beachy was racing a similar car, he had 215 horsepower. But that was about a year or two before. Still had a 3-speed column change and that sort of thing. Then the drag started at Calder.
Yes.
And I went out there with it. I don't know how fast I went the first time, but I ended up getting down to 1405, still with a 3-speed gearbox. Probably one of the quickest DHs out there. I think it was 1968 drag nationals, which were at Calder. Two brothers came down from Sydney with an FJ Holden called Moore's Missile, and they were doing 13.7. And I was in awe of that because I'm doing 14.05, and I got talking to them and they said, oh, if you put your engine and gearbox in an FJ, it'd probably go just as quick. And I said, oh, do you think so? And there it is, there's the results.
Oh, it's brilliant that we've got the ability to have it, and we'll get to the story of it leaving your hands and going through a number of hands and then coming back into your possession. So that's effectively what you did. You bought the FJ.
I put that in there and painted up the way it is and had smaller tyres and still the 3-speed gearbox. But I think I did a 13.43 the first meeting with it.
Wow.
So I had to thank the Moore brothers for their good advice, which they forever regretted. And continued to improve it over 3 or 4 years. But 13.43, I think it was, with the engine out of the EH in it. And then from then I built a dedicated engine for it and a better cylinder head. And I think it had 270 horsepower or something like that. And then I thought, no, we need more. So I stroked it, got an original forged steel crankshaft, got the MIG welded up the top of the big end, carved off counterweights with the oxy torch, welded on new ones to make it into a 12 counterweight crank, which was going to reduce the main bearing loadings. Ground it all up, put it in, still with a standard Holden conrods. I had some forged pistons that I'd got out of Aries in the States, and I got Repco to machine them up. I think that had 285 horsepower. We improved it from then, better cylinder heads and that sort of thing. And at the end, we had 343 horsepower at 7,800 revs. And with the diff ratio it had at the time, which was a 6.17, it'd get to 8,400 revs flat out, and it wouldn't rev any harder, and the finish line was still some way down the road. But I always thought a taller diff might have gone a bit faster, but in hindsight, it probably wouldn't have got off the line as quick.
Yep.
So that's the way it was.
What was there for dyno running the car? Was there chassis dynos back in the
Heenan
early
and Proud dyno. That was when you tested them in a steady state, not accelerated state, where you tend to lose, could be 20 horsepower because you're accelerating the engine. I had a Ford top-loader gearbox in it in the end with a twin plate Holden clutch that I'd modified and made a floater plate and that sort of thing. And a really heavy flywheel, like it was about solid 1.25 inches thick. The theory was there that when you drop the clutch, it wouldn't stall the engine. So I used to have it 7,000 revs and just sidestep the clutch. And the clutch would slip a bit and away you'd go. So when I look back, I thought it was right in spite of what I thought I was doing. Yeah.
Well, that's how you learn, and you obviously...
Well, it worked because, I always thought I should do something different, but it probably would have gone slower. Well, it was never beaten as far as an FJ is concerned, but I was up against things like Corvette Stingrays and what have you, and they were pretty hard to beat. There was a fella called Don Figgins who had a chain of shoe stores, and he was a pretty tough competitor because he was in the same MP class as I was. It got faster and faster. It got into the 12s and then 12.5s and 12.3s and that sort of thing. And I went to all the national meetings, and all the ones in Sydney, they used to have these Mr. Holden championships. I can't remember which year it was, but one of the years I decided to enter it in the senior category, which this fitted into, and the open category as well, which was against the gases and funny car type things and all that sort of thing.
Yep.
And ended up cleaning the whole lot of them up with it. So,
wow.
Yeah. But towards the end, or at the end, I think the best time I did was 11.81 at 118, 120 mile an hour.
Was there a minimum weight for the class, or did you?
Yeah, well, that was the B category. I'm not sure, like it was a weight for capacity rule. I can't remember exactly what it was now, but that fitted. I think it might have nearly fitted into the C category, which was a heavier weighted car, but for some reason I ended up in B because there was a lot of other Holdens in C, and it would have been a bit unfair.
So maybe it's a good opportunity to talk through, some point you sold the vehicle, that it went through a number of hands and it's made its way back to you, and you've got a few plans to resurrect it and a few upgrades to keep running it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think I sold it in 1972. A fella bought it and he changed it or repainted it and raced it for a while. And then another guy bought it and he had it for a while. I think it was sitting under his fig tree or something or other for a while. And then I heard it was for sale and I rang him up and he said, "Oh, I sold it 2 weeks ago." I said, "Why didn't you give me a call and see if I was interested?" But he didn't. So anyway, he gave me the name of the bloke who bought it, and I think my recollection is that he had it for a couple of weeks, and then he had to sell it for matrimonial problems and sold it to the guy who I bought it off. Anyway, I rang him up, the last owner before me. I said, "Do you want to sell it?" And he said, "No, I'll never sell it." And I said, "Not for any amount of money?" He said, "No, I'll never sell it." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" He said, "I want to paint it back to the way you had it, and I just want to keep it." I said, "Oh, okay." So I sent him a few pictures of whatever I had, and he's repainted it to what it is now, actually. Anyway, I met him at a drag race reunion up in Sydney, maybe 10 years ago now. I said, "You want to sell it?" And he said, "No, I told you I'd never sell it." I said, "Oh, if you ever change your mind, that's okay." And then a year or so later, same thing. "No, told you I'd never sell it." And about 18 months after that, he dies. And he was only a young fellow, like maybe 52, I think, from memory. Then I had his family ringing me up asking me if I was interested in purchasing it. So I had his wife, his brother, his mother, and his girlfriend all trying to sell it to me. So I said, well, when you figure out who might actually own it, I might be interested. Anyway, I was talking to a very good friend of mine, Dave Ryan, who was part of the Rare Spares group, and he said, oh, you've got to get it back, you've got to get it back. And I said, well, I don't know, I had a few other things going on, and I thought, do I really want it? And he said, yeah, you've got to get it. So we did a deal with a fella, well, it was actually John Brown was the fella that owned it, his brother. Did a deal and went up to Taree, it was, and pulled it out of his barn up there and brought it home, and that's pretty well the way it is at the moment. So I sold it originally just with the body shell on the front end, and that's pretty well the way I bought it back.
Right. So your plan is to build up a new diff. You've got some engine development and transmission development.
Got to build an engine, gearbox and diff, and hopefully I'll have it ready by Christmas.
And have you set a time that you'd like to...
Well, you're allowed to run them on methanol now, where we weren't back in the day, so that's worth a bit of power. And with the advances in technology and traction and radial plight tyres and all that sort of thing, I'm sort of hoping I can get down to low 11s. It may be better, I don't know, but I wouldn't be unhappy because I don't want to change it really from what it was. Otherwise, it's not what it was, you know. Otherwise, you think, do you supercharge it? Do you do this? Do you do that? But it's not the same car if you do that.
Well, we can help you with a supercharger, but we'd love to see it run aspirated.
Well, maybe we can just do that as just for a bit of an improvement down the track. But initially, just normally aspirated, yeah.
Well, I think there's got to be a 10 in it based on what you know, the tyre development and even engine management as well.
As I say, I'd rather be pleasantly surprised than unhappy, so.
So for the viewers, what do you think it'll weigh, roughly?
Well, we had a dummy engine in it before, because I was over at Dave Ryan's place, and he's got some scales, and it weighed 926 kilos.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a featherweight.
I think I can make it lighter.
Yep.
So it's got copper radiator and, you know, heavy diff and all that sort of thing, so.
You're going to put a cage in it?
You don't have to unless you do under 11.
Right, okay.
That's why it's only going to do low 11. Otherwise you put the cage in and you're back to doing low 11s again.
Well, you can go faster than 11 once.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
So when the drag started at Calder, was that the Jane family, Bob Jane?
I think it might have been. It could have been Jim Pascoe or his wife. Jim died, but it was around about that time anyway. So, yeah, Bob was certainly involved, but I don't know whether he owned Calder at that stage. I think the drag ceased for some reason in 1972.
Right.
And I think the second last meeting I went to with it was up at Surface Paradise, and towed it up there with the H I was talking about earlier. Tim in the back seat in a bassinet. He was about, I don't know, a year old or something or other. Don't remember it.
No air conditioning?
No, it wouldn't. Oh yeah, wind the window down, quarter vent.
So the EH became a circuit car?
No, that was a different car. That was a car that Ian Palou had, and he was living in Brunswick, round the corner from the workshop, and he used to come round and I'd do things for him, and then it was one meeting where I went out and had a go, and I don't think I even had my licence. I'm not sure, but I think I just put the helmet on and went out and did a race in it and pretended I was him.
Yep.
We hotted that. That was a 6-cylinder. Tuned that up a bit, and in the end, I ran in I think it was sport sedan at that stage. They had an under 3 litre category and an over 3 litre, and the EH was under 3 litre. And the over 3 litre was the XU1 Tiranas and that sort of thing. I ended up coming second overall. I won the 3 litre, but I came second overall to Peter Brock in that series. Yeah. He had an XU1 with a Irving aluminium cylinder head on and all the fruit, you know. So
yeah, we'll definitely talk about the relationship with Peter, which was significant. So reflecting on Harrop the business during those years, you must have been burning the midnight oil between building cars, fixing cars to go racing, and working, with your dad during the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how many staff would there have been in that late 60s, early 70s?
I think probably about 5. And I've always believed that you either got to be a one-man band or have at least 5 people. Anywhere any less than that, it sort of doesn't work properly.
Marginal. Yeah, that's probably a good assessment.
Yeah.
And what sort of customers, and was it still haulage, transport, textiles predominantly?
It was mainly semi-trailers and tray bodies and that sort of thing, straightening them from when they roll them over and that sort of thing. We used to do a lot of that sort of thing.
So was it the success of this car running fast that then created a level of inquiry, or was that later?
No, it didn't really create any inquiry there. Once I got involved with Norm Beachy, he had me doing whatever I could do basically, and then somehow or other, I think it might have been Alan Moffat found out that I might have been able to help him when he just got his, I guess, the Mustang, and he had an initial involvement with Bob Jane, as I remember. I started doing a bit of work for him, and then also probably a lot more work for Bob Jane. And at that stage, John Shepherd had just left Bob Jane, and Pat Purcell was John Shepherd's understudy, if you like.
At that time, Norm Beachy was a very prominent person within motorsport, and there's a funny story when he first came to seek you out and ask about suspension components.
Yeah, he didn't actually seek me out. I was down at his speed shop, and I got introduced, and he said, "Oh, can you make me a Watts linkage?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll be able to do that." And I was probably 20 or so at the time. He said, "Well, that's good." And I said, "But what is it?" So he waved his hands around, and I got the idea of what he was talking about. So I went back to work and found some old bits of 1x8 steel, rusty stuff, and made a model up, welder up, and took it up to show Norm, and he said, "Yeah, that's what I want." He said, "Well, fit it to my, not the model I made, but that's the principle I want on the Chevy Nova at the time." From then on, I started doing more and more work for Norm on the fabrication side of things. I think he retired around 1972 or something like that. I started doing work for Bob Jane and Alan Moffat and those sort of people.
And mostly motorsport, race car.
Yeah, bits and pieces. And John Shepherd, in fact, going back a bit, John Shepherd initially worked for Norm Beachy for a while. Anyway, I had always wanted to be able to oxy-weld sheet aluminium so you could make panels and things for cars, and I could never do it. Try as hard as I like, I couldn't do it. Anyway, a fellow from Sydney who was Australia's best at doing that sort of thing, John had employed him to come down to do some work on Norm's Monaro, making brake ducts and that sort of thing. Anyway, they went out to lunch, so I've raided his sugar bag that he had his gear in, and got his flux and his filler rod and his goggles, and away I went, and it was just easy. And the only difference was he had the right kind of goggles that didn't flare with the flux. Yep. So from then on, I was away, and thanked him for that.
So maybe describe the vehicle leaves, the Howler leaves your hands and goes through its journey of different owners, and then you're then passionate about the EH. Is that the next sort of car that you...
The circuit car?
The circuit car?
Yeah. Once again, the fellow that's got that now doesn't want to sell it. He bought it off Wayne Mankin, who had a turbocharged 6-cylinder Holden in it. He's going to restore it to what it was then, apparently. But
this is the sport sedan?
Yes. Yeah.
It had glow weave sponsorship on it.
That's right, yeah. That's when I had it, and it had a Repco 5000 engine in it then.
It'd be good to have the Repco 5000.
Oh, well, yeah, if I could get it back and had enough time to do it, I'd put it back to the Bob Jane colours with the Repco 5000 engine, and run it in the historic sports sedans.
So it was Victorian sports sedan racing at that time in the mid-70s, mid to late 70s?
No, it was New South Wales. I think sports sedans started in New South Wales out of Toby Lee series, and then it got going down here shortly after. They had the Marlborough series, which was worth a lot of money in those days to win a race from memory. And that was really good for a couple of years.
The tobacco money back then was pretty good.
Exactly, yeah. That was when you had the Bob Janes,
Frank Gardner.
Repco Tirana. Frank Gardner drove the Repco Tirana for a while, but then he built his Corvair. And then John McCormick with the Valiant Charger with the Repco 5000 engine. And that was a real interesting time back in those early days.
And Harrop, the business, was it starting to look more at automotive related customers at that point?
No, not a lot. I think at first got involved with the automotive stuff in a larger sense was back in the A9X Tirana days is when that started to expand, because we had...
which would be 78?
Yeah, it would have been 78, yeah. Yep. We started making Detroit locker cases for the HQ diff that they were running in the A9Xs. Did all those and brakes and that sort of thing. And that's where we get into a whole different area of things we were doing then.
And where did the relationship with the Holden dealer team, is that around that time in the late 70s?
In fact, it was when we were doing it must have been late-ish 70s, but it was still in Tirana days, like XU1 days, whenever that was. Bob Jane and Harry Firth were fairly close friends, and Bob said to Harry, get me to have a look at Detroit lockers for the XU1s, I think it was. It sort of grew from there, and then we started getting involved in discs and calipers and that sort of thing.
Well, that was after you had the incident at Bathurst.
Yeah, well, these brake pads they used to use at Bathurst, I sort of liken them to the friction coefficient of a clinker brick. And they just didn't, the only way they wore was tapered. They'd just wear tapered like this, like you couldn't believe. Anyway, I was in the shower one morning, and I think it was when I was racing with Harry, and because the pistons used to jam in the bores because the calipers the pads would wear tapered, and that was causing all sorts of sticking and that sort of thing. And I thought, why don't we put a swivelly piston in like a spherical bearing in the middle of the piston and put a flange on it. So if the pads were tapered, the piston can stay square in the bore. But that made them wear more tapered. So that's when I started making, in fact, we moved the pads out of the caliper, rotated them around, so moved the pressure point further back, and that helped a fair bit.
Right.
In fact, that happened before the swivelly pistons, that's right. And then I thought, no, we'll make different size pistons, and that was, now it's common. Everybody makes them with differential size pistons.
4-piston pistons, or was it a sliding
yeah, they were
caliper?
4-piston then, yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So you must have been having some pretty good success driving, like from a motorsport perspective, because you drove at Bathurst for the first time.
Yeah, in 77, I think was the first time with Charlie O'Brien.
Wow.
In I think it was L34. Well, it might have been a four-door A9X if they ever had one. I know it was a 4-door anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was a privateer?
No, that was with HDT in the Harry Firth days.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we came 4th, I think.
Fantastic.
Maybe 5th, something like 4th or 5th anyway.
And Peter Brock, who you had the strong relationship with, his first Bathurst win was in an XU1 from memory. I'm sort of testing Bathurst. My memory now.
Was it a Monaro?
We'll clarify that and show it on the screen.
Yeah.
So the viewers would love to hear how you initially got connected with Peter and started doing different things.
I first met Peter probably in roadhouses on the way to Sydney, where he'd be going to Oran Park racing his A30, and I'd be taking this up to Castlereagh to the drags, and we'd sort of, how'd you go this weekend and all that sort of thing, and that's where I got to know him then. And it sort of grew from there with all sorts of projects I did with him.
And he obviously was a key driver with the Holden dealer team, and you were supporting those race cars
Yes,
from an engineering point of view as well?
I can remember going out to Howler one day. I think I was being auditioned to see whether I could do it. And anyway, I'm blazing around there and I was 3/10 slower than he was and I was devastated. And I said, well, take me for a drive, Pete. And got in the passenger seat and away we went. And the only difference was he was more in front of the car than I was. I was tending to let it get out of shape and then correcting it, where he didn't let it get out of shape in the first place. And from then I thought, oh, that's pretty easy. So it was, yeah, not as quick, but pretty close to his times, yeah.
He was able to flow the car.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And you've got to be relentless too. Just no mishaps anywhere.
No sympathy.
Otherwise, you've got a gap and where do you get that, you know? So.
Did we want to touch on the sports sedan, or did you win championships with the EH?
Yeah, the EH, when it was a 6-cylinder, as I said, I came second outright and first in the class. Bob Jane was then the promoter at Holden with the Marlborough series. He offered me a Repco 5000 engine, like the 308 based engine, out of a Bowen that he wasn't using. And did I want to use that? Do I want to use it? Absolutely. So grabbed it and shoehorned it into the EH. I went out to Holden, and I think the first meeting, I was second on the grid, and I thought, this is all a bit easy because that's that much more torque than 6-cylinder, of course. It was probably a bit heavy compared to the other cars for only a 5-litre engine, but I think I had the record at Sandown at one stage briefly, but it was pretty well on the pace. But at Holden, which was basically 2 drag strips, you get left behind a bit down the straight.
Yeah, sure. And you ultimately sold that car as well?
Yeah, yeah.
And how did the business at that time, you mentioned you started making brake parts for the Holdens, and the relationship with Holden, that came a little bit later?
Yeah, that was much later, I think. That wasn't until we came here, I think.
No, it was back in Theobald Street when we started doing some work with cylinder heads and.
Oh, cylinder heads, yeah.
Yeah.
We ended up doing all the cylinder heads for what they call the A9L engine, which was they call them the B-cast heads that Holden were doing, and we'd machine them for the larger valves. Actually, that was through Peter Brock. He said, could I machine them? And I said, yeah. He said, give me a price. So I gave him a price, and they decided, yep, that's the go. Apparently it was a fair bit cheaper than where they were getting them from. And on the basis of that, I ended up buying a vertical machining centre from John Harder Mazak.
Right.
And away we went. We made all the jigs and fixtures to do them, and we were doing 24 hours a day machining those things. I think we did maybe 6,000 of or something like that.
Wow. So this would have been early 80s?
Let me
Mid-80s.
just think. Yeah, mid-80s, I'm thinking.
So we've recently shared on our social media, Silvano is now our longest standing
Yeah.
team
Yes,
member with
that's
over 40 years, and
Yep.
he recalls machining intake manifolds and heads for what would have been
That's
Peter
right.
Brock's,
Yep.
road car,
Mm-hmm.
which would have been VK Commodore, I'd imagine.
Yeah,
Oh no,
it was. It was
VBBC.
the manifolds. They were for the. No, that was the VN. Oh no, earlier on it was the L34 carby manifold. We used to machine it had 2 large holes, 2 small holes, and we used to mill them out to make it sort of 2 larger plenums, and also qualify or machine the inlet port in the manifold back up a little bit, because that way you could port them a bit better. And that was for what they call the A9L engine, which, I don't know, it would have been mid to late 80s. It was Theobald Street anyway. Yeah.
So getting that vertical mill, and John Hart continues to be a major supply partner and technology partner with all the machines we've got today. That must have really been a pivot point for the production capacity and just the capabilities within the business to to take on OEM style.
That's right.
Work
yeah,
like
it
that.
was, yeah. And I think we end up having 2 machines doing those cylinder heads because 24 hours a day wasn't enough to keep up. We had pallets stacked to the roof of cylinder heads.
How many staff would there have been at that point?
Maybe 15 or so, I'm thinking. Would you think?
About right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Tim, you would have been just starting to make yourself sort of busy sweeping floors and
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And helping run the machines with some of the guys back then, and then cleaning them afterwards. Yeah, absolutely. Remember all that.
And then there was another pivotal time after that when we were at, must have been Darabin Road, I think. I wanted a horizontal machining centre because we were doing diff housings and that sort of thing, and a vertical machining centre, whilst you could do it, it wasn't quite as easy and as accurate. Anyway, I wanted one, and Holden came to me and they wanted some exhaust manifolds machined because they was for the Daewoo engine, and they were busy setting up their machine and wanted to know if I could do it. I said, yeah, we can. And I think I quoted whatever it was meant that it'd pay for 3 or 4 months worth of repayments on the machine.
Yep.
So I thought,
business case
that'll
was
break
obvious.
the back of it if I get that work there, and I've got all this other work I need to do on it anyway.
What was that, a little cast iron 4-cylinder?
Yeah, for the
cast,
family 2 engine. Yeah.
Right.
We started doing them, and I think we had the jigs and fixtures done almost overnight. I think it was, I don't know, was it 6,000 or something? Or
A bit less than that it started with, but then it just continued on a bit more.
no, 4,500 I reckon it was, because I know how much they were to machine each, and I know what the figure was to do it. So anyway, I think it was 4,500. We didn't stop at 4,500. I think we ended up doing something like 160,000 of them.
Wow.
And we ended up having 3 horizontal machining centres busy doing them, night and day.
Were they twin pallet machines? Or?
Yeah. We've still got 2 of them here.
And one of the purchasing guys came to me and they wanted a reduction because, you know, we've covered all our initial costs and all that sort of thing. I said, yeah, I can certainly do that. I can do them this amount cheaper. And if we stuff you around with production, we'll pay. And if you stuff us around, you pay. And if you can come to that agreement, we can do them a reasonable amount cheaper.
Yep.
But he wouldn't come at that because it would have been cost neutral, because we'd quite often have a shift of people waiting for castings to arrive because Holden were casting them. And they wouldn't arrive, and you'd have a whole night's blokes sitting around twiddling their thumbs, drinking coffee, waiting for the work to arrive. Anyway, we ended up losing the job, and the crowd that took it over, it lasted 6 months, and Daewoo fell over and it was all over. And they'd set it up and hardly done any of it. So
Wow.
bit of karma there.
So were there other OEM style opportunities that grew on the back of jobs like that with Holden?
Yeah, we were doing the twin throttle body manifolds for the VN Group A engine.
Yep.
Which would have been originally the VL initially. So like the 88.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it was,
it was.
yeah,
Yeah, it
and
was.
the
The
plenum and-
Batmobile type thing. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
We just did a video on a car in Queensland that was a 96 VS, you know, the yellow GDSR, and I
Oh, that one with the wings
Yeah, we
mounts
did
we
all the
made
mounts
for
and
it.
all
Yeah,
that.
I
that's
pointed
right.
out to the workshop owner, Kent, that we milled and supplied those back in the day. But
Yeah.
one of the comments on the video pointed out that the intake that's on the car now is a off the VN, because the plenum had like a slant at the front
That's
compared
right,
to compared to the VL. It's amazing to see that they're just so expensive now because of the rarity.
That's
they're
right,
they're
yeah.
highly desirable.
Yeah. Now there was another crowd machining them. We wanted to do it, but didn't get the job. Anyway, they started machining them, and they were leaking water. And it turns out the machining centre they had was 1 degree increments. And I think the angle of the head is 5 degrees, 9 minutes, 22 seconds, if my memory stands correct.
Right.
And they were milling at just 5 degrees, not
Right.
the 9 minutes, 22 seconds, and over what it was nearly 110 mil, it's a fair bit out.
Yep.
So they weren't sealing. So they were in all sorts of trouble trying to build engines. So we ended up getting them and machining them because we had a thousandth of a degree accuracy with the machines we had then. Ended up machining them all in the end. So it's sort of funny how it all
Well, it
turns around.
highlights the value of having good quality machines and good quality
absolutely.
engineering.
Some things you can get away with 1 degree, but if you're going to do a variety of work, you really need the versatility.
Naturally, Harrop has always had a strong association with the Holden brand, and HDT as a race team and road cars in that era was immensely popular, but your involvement steadily grew over the years, both driving cars and helping to engineer them.
That's right. Yeah, I first got involved with Harry Firth, doing work for him and also driving, and we did a lot of interesting stuff during that period in conjunction with Holden as well, the Holden metallurgy department and that sort of thing. Latterly, when John Shepherd took over, I was helping him with a lot of the machining and that sort of thing as well.
So you must have been pretty handy behind the wheel. What were the cars like to drive, honestly, in that era?
Well,
as race cars?
They were sort of pretty hairy, I guess you'd say. Not a lot of brakes. And going down Conrod Straight, the first hump you'd leave the ground, so you just had to get the steering straight and you have to back off, otherwise the engine would over rev. So just no downforce, just lift, like the air underneath them. And that was before the chase, of course, so you just sort of hang on, And you get to the end of the Conrod Straight and on the brakes, and you'd have to build them up to temperature, and you'd be standing on them, nearly busting the back out of the seat. And you'd think, nah, I'm not going to make it. And it'd slowly build up a bit of friction, and you'd get round the corner and you think, got round that. And you'd do that for 37 laps, and it never actually ran off. But every lap you'd think, not going to make it, so they were interesting cars.
And you had some success. You mentioned the fourth place.
Yeah, it was either fourth or fifth with Charlie O'Brien in 1977, I reckon that was.
Yeah, absolutely massive achievement.
Yeah.
And then the cars became more sophisticated. I use that word loosely, but the development journey and your contribution to that and the business's efforts around manufacturing parts, it was a pretty exciting time for touring cars.
Oh yeah, it was. Well, back in those days, you had probably 380 horsepower, I think. Lap times, I think the first year I was there, we were doing 2-minute 25 or somewhere around there. And you look at it these days, they're doing 2 minutes 2 seconds with a chase, an extra 150 metres or whatever it is, and with the same size engine. But to say that you'd be going that fast in a touring car later on. In fact, the lap record was in a Formula 5000. Neil Allen had it in 1968 or 70, was at 9.7, 2-minute 9.7.
Right.
And you look at it now,
with
a Formula 5000 that had tyres this wide and wings and half the weight and same size engine, unlimited revs, better fuel, and touring cars are doing that. So it just shows you what's achievable.
It's phenomenal. And during those years of the 70s and 80s, there was obviously brake developments that you're working on. There was differential. We talked about the intake manifolds with the VL, but there was really every aspect of powertrain and driveline was under the microscope to find weight loss, durability, performance gains.
That's right, yeah. Radial ply tyres came along, that changed a lot of things as well. I ended up designing a negative camber rear end in 1986, that was. I don't know how that fits into your timing, what you're saying, but with CV joints and all that sort of thing. And I think we probably made them all for the category at that stage, like 2 a day you'd be making of them sort of thing,
So was it that 80s period where the motorsport product that Harrop was manufacturing just really accelerated?
Yes, it was, yeah. Yeah, into calipers and even down to the monoblock calipers and all that sort of thing. Tail shafts, as I said, the whole rear end, engine parts.
Yeah, all the
Basically, whatever we were capable of doing, we were doing and selling.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's great. I've watched Jack Perkins has got the YouTube channel with some of the restorations they're doing. There's so many Harrop components that are being refurbished. I know Jack's calling you, Tim, to get very specific.
And Oscar and NASCAR around similar time as well.
That's
and
right,
lots of parts happening,
we're heavily
developing
involved
that.
in that for a while as well, in the ill-fated Future Tourer.
Yep.
Did you ever run at the Thunderdome on the oval?
No, never did, no. I don't think I've ever drove around there.
That was
even
early
at any
90s.
speed. 88, I think, was the first
80s,
meeting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite an iconic period. Like NASCAR obviously came and did 1 or 2 races, and
That's right, yep.
later you obviously built connections in the US around some of the Aussies that had moved to the US to support NASCAR teams. And
That's right.
I know we've got crankshafts and various other components that the US came to Harrop for support.
Yeah, well, the first job I did for the US was an intake manifold to suit the C5R engine, which Hendrick were involved in building the engine at that stage. We built, I don't know how many manifolds we did then.
Yeah, I can't
And that
recall.
was probably 2001, I think. And then we had 3D printed trumpets, would you believe? It wasn't until 5 years ago that suddenly 3D printing, this was all we go, but we did it 25 years ago almost.
Because Pratt and Miller are heavily involved. I'm not sure if they were around at that time with the C5R. They were certainly a big part of the C6R, which came after that.
So C5R, we first got involved in doing that for Andy Randolph, who was working for Hendrick at the time. And I think he now works for Childress.
Oh, Childress.
Oh, Richard
Childress,
Childress.
yeah. After Hendrick, we were doing quite a lot of work for DEI, which was the Dale Earnhardt. Did all sorts of things for them, crankshafts and rocker stands and that sort of thing. In fact, the rocker stands at that stage was probably one of the best engineering exercises we did, wasn't it?
Yeah, yep.
The intricacy of it all and reverse taper O-ring grooves and all that sort of thing was...
Well, you travelled to the US at that time, and the NASCAR budgets were just...
they're
DEI
still huge. Was still selling low, trying to spend last year's budget, apparently. So, so we were doing stuff. I'd be over there for a few weeks at a time, send back some drawings or sketches and get it made here and then send it back over, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely iconic brands, and for the US viewers, they're household names.
That's right. And then we did a negative camber rear end, like an adjustable negative camber rear end for, I can't think of his name, but yeah, somehow they found out we could do one, so we made it to suit a NASCAR actually, which was heavier spindles and that sort of thing because they whacked the wall at 200 mile an hour and that sort of thing.
And so there's US motorsport support at a tier 1 level. There's obviously the touring cars in Australia, and around, was it early 90s or even earlier when that Ford Holden rivalry really...
Yeah, early 90s it started up again, yes. Yeah. Actually, the rules were just built to suit the two cars.
So prior to that, there was Group A.
Yeah,
that's right.
Coming out of Group A Euro.
And that whole Sierra, Godzilla sort of period. And I know we did diffs for DJR and all sorts of other components, but the true Falcon versus Commodore rivalry was, accelerating early 90s, and you're involved with the Holden racing team as well.
That's right, yeah. In 93, I think, they weren't having a lot of success. And I think I don't know what we're doing, but Thomas Mazzera, who was driving for them and I think managing the team at the time, came over to pick something up, and I'd known Thomas from back in the 70s sort of thing. We got talking. I said, I wouldn't mind coming and have a look at what you're doing. He said, would you? So I went over and had a look and went to the next meeting with them and had a bit of a look, and Thomas said, well, can you help us? I said, I think I can. I did the end of that year, and then Tom came out. I got interviewed by Tom, which in hindsight I think was a foregone conclusion anyway, but he just wanted to meet me. So
Tom Walkinshaw.
Tom Walkinshaw, sorry, yeah. I was their chief engineer for, I think, about 5 years until the end of '99, I think it was. And we did some really good things then, like even looking back at it today, that one of the things which was a bit humorous, they were having a round of the championship at Calder, which consisted of a pit stop and a lap. So the pit stop meant you had to change, I think it was 2 tyres or something like that. So I thought, right, we need to make a captive wheel nut, so as we don't have to pick the nut up and put it onto the spindle and that sort of thing. So I designed a captive wheel nut and did it and took it over. They were operating out of Notting Hill at the time. We were allowed to have 3 people on the wheel, each wheel at that stage. Anyway, it was under 3 seconds back in '94, I think it was. And it was so funny because we were laughing our heads off how quick this was. The guys from the engine shop come out, what's all the laughter about? And we showed, watch this. One of the engine guys said,
What happened?
where'd the nut come from? But it was captive in the wheel.
Yeah.
But at that meeting at Calder, they wanted to ban it, even though it was completely legal. Anyway.
Like a lot of motorsport innovation.
Yeah, so what they said was, you're going to have to change the left tyre for the right tyre, because they had left and right hand threads at that stage. So back to the workshop, get another right hand spindle, whack that in. So we ended up with right hand spindles both sides. I think we're on pole by 11 seconds or something or other. But anyway.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, but then it got banned shortly after. I think Larry was the main instigator there, because at that stage he was still 5 studs. But
yes.
Shortly after, it became compulsory, and was compulsory until the year before last. So for 20 years or so, that's what you had to have. Because I argued it was a safety issue, because you didn't have nuts spinning off down the road and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny how they want to torpedo what you do, which is completely legal. But anyway.
The politics of it all.
Yeah,
now, Tim, during those early years, I know you went to Bathurst early 90s. My first Bathurst was 93. I camped on the hill.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Okay.
I actually went sometime during the 80s. I went up with the Richards family one year during Sierra days. When he was racing.
Yeah, well, you went with HRT one year.
When he was racing with Brock in the Mobile Sierra one year, and then obviously went up with HRT for a couple of years there during those 90s. A lot of my early memories are going to race meetings, being out at Calder or something. I'm probably too young to remember this, but certainly around the sports sedan days and later the touring car days, going to all the meetings, absolutely.
So during high school, you obviously had passion for cars and motorsport. Did you anchor in at that point thinking mechanical engineering is where I want to be? Yeah,
I guess growing up around it, always had an interest in motor racing, full stop, and followed it all passionately, and just followed that road, and then ended up going to same high school as Dad, onto uni, and during uni continued to work around the workshop during those uni years and what have you, and just been involved in the business basically all my life. So
you're a bit of a dab hand in a go-kart too.
Yeah, pretty handy on a go-kart.
Yeah. He used to go down, where's it, down Port Melbourne, was it?
Yep.
With a few of his mates, and come home and cleaned them all up. So I went down there one time myself, couldn't keep up. I guess I was a bit heavier though, that's my excuse anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. So you were helping out with the crewing. I know there's a few funny stories that you've had with HRT, with various innovations over the years.
Oh yeah, there was a whole lot of gadgets that were introduced into the cars. Some brake calipers that were a bit top secret one year with the quick pad changes as well.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah,
because they said you've got to have a compulsory pad change. So we ended up making these. They weren't monoblock, no, they were two-piece
at that time. Yep.
But it had a step piston. When you jack the car up, you could have air pressure, which forced the pistons back into the caliper.
Yep.
The trouble is, when you jack the car up, there was this foof of dust coming out of the wheel, which was a bit of a giveaway. But by the time you got the wheel off, the pistons are right back in the caliper. And you just pluck the pads out, whack the new ones in, pump it up, and away you go. So
They got onto that pretty quick, did they?
I think that got banned too,
got
yeah.
banned,
Yeah.
Oh, it's fantastic to hear the innovation that's obviously applied throughout. So the business during that time was extremely busy, and there was a number of new machines that were introduced in the 90s, like from the horizontal machines that came in the 80s.
Yep.
So Tim,
Yeah.
you've probably got good recollection on some of those developments.
Yeah, I guess continuing on from the work that we were doing for Holden and later HSV, through the relationship Dad had, I guess, with HRT, and HSV were building the road cars at that point in time, we started looking at the brakes on those. We were already doing brakes for aftermarket for Commodores and Falcons, but then we made a bespoke set of tools and then did the brakes for the HSV Commodore, starting from VT model, I think it may have been.
Yeah, I can't remember when.
For HSV specifically, yeah, for two models of brakes. So that required more machinery that we invested in to do all the calipers, pistons, rotors, and what have you. And it just continued to grow from there, whether it be HSV and then later on into other OEs, Lotus cars in the UK, FPV locally, TRD locally.
Yep.
Just continues to grow.
With the increased demand on those things, we're having trouble getting good quality aluminium castings, so we end up setting up the aluminium casting plant in this building actually. That solved a lot of problems actually. It made deliveries a lot better and we could control the quality far better. And then we made dies instead of having them sand cast and all that sort of thing to improve the production.
Yeah, it's a continual pursuit to get the production efficiency and maintain the quality. Like quality is what the brand and the business has been so recognised for 70 years. And I remember when I started, Len would still come and visit and stick his head in and catch up with the guys, and someone like Silvano that's been with us for 40 years and some are well into the 30s. There's incredible pedigree and history with the team that we've got.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Well, walking around today, the amount of guys that are still there after all this time is really good. So they obviously enjoy the environment.
A couple of them have left and then decided to come back.
Yeah,
and that's
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's right. It is a real team effort. There's been a lot of talented people who've worked here over the years and still continue to work here, and it's enabled us to do a whole lot of good things for sure.
And a lot of our followers today, and superchargers are a huge part of our product portfolio. The relationship with Eaton is a key part of that, which would have been early 2000s.
That's right.
There's a visit you did to the States.
Yeah, well, that formed the relationship with Eaton fairly early on to purchase the rotating groups, and we'd do the rest. So that's been a good partnership.
And on the back of that, there's been some strong OEM relationships, like obviously the Toyota relationship in the early 2000s, which then gave us an opportunity with Ford. So locally, the Miami V8 with the 1900 Supercharger, that was a really solid program. But the aftermarket business has always been at our core, and supporting customers that enjoy their car, always want to go faster, and superchargers that fit well and perform well and don't need constant maintenance. It was a recipe for success. I know there's so many incredible stories in the way the motorsport, the OEMs and aftermarket customers have threaded in and out over the years. But something that comes to mind that everyone often mentions is the 355 stroker crank, and there's a great story about how that came about.
Yeah, that's right. I had a VB Commodore station wagon at the time that came with a 253 engine. I thought it's time to give it a bit more squirt, so I got a 308 cylinder block and got a Chev 350 steel crankshaft, which I had to turn the back off because the rear main's a lot wider on the Chev. But apart from that, it's a pretty close fit. So we used to turn it down through the middle of the main bearing and turn and mill up a new back flange, which we then push onto a peg and basically weld up the whole width of the rear main bearing to hold this flange on, and then regrind it, and away we went. So that gave us, with a 30 thou overbore, it was 355 cubic inches. As a road engine, you'd make pretty close to 400 horsepower fairly easily. Of course, a lot more torque, which was what it was all about. They were pretty popular, and I was buying every steel 350 crank I could find. I had a bloke going to the States, buying up from wreckers around the States, and it got harder and harder to get good ones, and the demand was still there for these stroker cranks. So I thought, we need to make a cast one up. I went to Holden, and they said, oh no, they couldn't do it. They couldn't fit it into their casting plant. And I went and had a look and said, oh, if you move this here, move that there. And they were pretty helpful. And in the end, I got hold of one of their patterns and modified it so they could put it in. And on one of the pattern plates, which I think used to do 3 at one stage, or it might have been 5. Anyway, they'd put our one in one of the stations and cast them, and I'd buy them 50 at a time. And it had the Harrop name on it, which is still the same today. And then HSV decided they needed a bigger engine. I don't know when that would have been, mid-90s, I suppose, or something like that. We were commissioned to build about half a dozen pilot engines, and we built the short motor, like with the crankshaft, these cast cranks, conrods and pistons, and supply it back to them. They did their testing, and they were very happy with all that. So it went into production for the HSV cars, and we were just basically making the cranks from scratch. Holden would supply the castings, we do the machining and grinding and supply it to them, and Holden would assemble them. In the end, Holden decided they wanted to do the lot themselves, which they did. I couldn't really stop them because they'd helped me. But they left the Harrop name on it, which is interesting, but you can tell which is one of our manufacturers versus one of theirs, because we had a lot better radiuses in corners, and
Is that right?
And the rear flange was machined differently and that sort of thing. So, you know, I can look at one and say, no, it's one of ours, or it isn't straight away, even though it might have the Harrop name on it.
Yep.
So that was an interesting project.
And that Holden V8, that was the high performance engine from HSV right up until, I think, VT.
215 kilowatts.
Yeah, 215 was, until the Gen 3 came along,
Yeah, which was pretty good in the day, I suppose. But
And then I think it was VT Series 2 that the LS1 was introduced.
Yeah.
And then LS has been a huge part of our business, but it's those connections that have been developed and the pedigree of Harrop's motorsport and aftermarket capability. Like there's even the relationship with McLaren when they were in town racing Formula One. If they had a need for something urgent, they were on the phone to you.
That's right. Send drawings from England or something, and I'd get into it. And I remember one day or night or morning, I'd worked all night, and I can't remember, it was something that had to be done in a 4th axis. Anyway, I gave it to Nick, who was our operator at the time, and he come down, hey boss, there's something wrong, it won't work. And I'd go upstairs, and it'd be 15 seconds, I'd gone to sleep, and try and wake up and figure it out. And in the end I did, but we'd end up getting it done. And Paul Banks, he had helicopters on site. I'd ring him up and say, it's ready, get somebody over the helipad, I'll be there in 5 minutes. So
Express
I couldn't believe it. Express down to there, yeah.
That's excellent. And obviously what we did with superchargers early on led to the opportunity with Ford with their V8 program. So it was our 1900 supercharger that they recognised as an opportunity to have their high performance model.
Yep.
And our other sorts of motorsport like GT racing, there was programs that Harrop became a go-to for various parts. I think what's really fascinating is the need to find solutions to problems, whether it's performance or whether it's durability, but the motorsport connections continue to grow, and the Harrop business grew on the back of that in terms of the powertrain, driveline, brakes. Like there's just a lot of different situations where someone had an issue and you had to come up with a solution.
That's right. Well, I've always found, or usually, that identifying the problem's the hard part. The cure is usually a bit easier.
So I recall there's brakes on the system that we've done for NSX and Vipers, like GT racing came to Australia.
When GT racing first came to Australia, they the brakes that were all standing on the vehicles weren't adequate for the track, so we had to very quickly develop some brakes for the Dodge Vipers, on the NSXs, and all the GT cars that were coming in at that time.
Yeah. Oh, the recognition was huge, and I think I started really getting passionate and hooked on Bathurst probably in the 80s. Like I distinctly remember watching, VL Commodores racing, and then in the 90s there was the Tech Centre, and I remember seeing, I think it might have been early 2000s, Neil Crompton did the segment here when the Mazak E410s and was looking at the production of the hard parts that were making their way into most of the grid in that time, like late 90s, early 2000s, when touring, like Australian Touring Car Championship, supercars is probably what it was called at the time, was huge, and we were on most of the cars.
That's right, yeah. Whether it be crankshafts or certainly wheel nuts, that was probably nearly the whole category at that stage. Crankshafts, which basically we prepare each end and put it in the Integrex, basically pull it out ready to grind, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Heat treating,
that's
oil
right.
holes, the whole lot, just let it run.
What do you reckon the cycle time was on that?
It was up near 10 hours.
Was it?
Yeah. But yeah, everything like front uprights, obviously all the brakes, tail shafts, rear ends, watch linkage systems, roll bar systems, all the linkages for that, intake manifolds, carbon fibre trumpets with all that. Yeah, there was a lot of product going on then, and slight iterations for different teams as well.
The HRT thing, I remember we made linear bearing front struts, the McPherson strut. That was an interesting project because the suspension used to bind up with the lateral loads. So I made these front struts that had recirculating balls, so there was no friction. I remember once, I think it was Stephen Richards, was blazing around and we put these struts in. He couldn't believe it. Like around Calder, I think it was about 0.7 of a second faster. He said you get mid-corner and you can turn at grips, whereas before it'd just understeer because everything was bound up. They're satisfying things, but once again you look at it and you say, well, it looks like it's binding up. How do we fix that? So
it was really the glory years of lots of testing. Like the budgets were big, sponsorship dollars were there. Like you would have been testing with HRT every week almost.
Oh no, it wasn't that often. It wasn't that much testing. Like I can't think of really too much that didn't work. Like whatever you did was an improvement. You'd run it at the next meeting.
Test days though. Still,
was there? Yeah, I don't
all that rear end stuff got developed through that too. When we went from CV joints to the spider gear stuff.
And then during those years, the OEM relationships evolved. Like we obviously had a relationship with Kenworth and Packard Parts with the quality castings that we could do here in house for the K200 models, and great customers like ABT with the braking systems that we're doing for mining applications. The diversity of the business has continued to develop, and we've got our US facility now, which is doing well, and our superchargers are growing in popularity over there. So there's just an incredible legacy that we're continuing the journey. Another iconic project that always comes to mind and we get asked about, and Holden and Commodores were arguably at their peak in the early 2000s. Some of those concept cars that Holden commissioned were absolutely incredible. Like Effigy is recognised around the world, and we played a big part in a lot of those components.
Yeah, that was an interesting project. Richard Falazzo came to us and told us what we were doing, or told us what he was doing and whether we could help. And I went down there and had a look at what they were doing. It was basically a Corvette chassis that they'd lengthened to make it all work. And we came to an agreement where we would supply superchargers and brakes and wheels, I think. What else was there?
Part of the grill.
On the basis that, whenever there was any advertising, we get credited with what we've done, and he was more than happy to do that. So I think it was worthwhile doing.
Yeah, there's some great clips. I think the car went to the US and was shown. It shows over there as well.
I don't know whether we still get credit for it or not, but it was supposed to. So,
well, I'm trying to set up a visit to the museum with Richard we'll hopefully do that as another episode to showcase that car. But there was other concept cars. Sandman was another iconic one.
Yeah, they did. We did some work for that. They did the brakes and some other bits, I think, for it. And they did that Tirana.
Oh, the concept Tirana.
Concept Tirana, yeah.
And while you've retired formally from the business, Ron, you're always going to remain part of it naturally, but your passion with motorsport and helping customers that have got those now historic race cars, you're still actively involved.
Yeah, a lot of people are restoring cars, of course, and they might have worn out calipers or something like that. And some of the calipers I made back in the early 80s, I suppose, or even late 70s, I've been doing them and doing them on similar equipment to what I had back then. So it's pretty satisfying, I've got to say, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of it, and the customer's happy to receive it. And I often use the analogy about being a traffic policeman. Nobody wants to receive the efforts of your work, do they? So I don't treat it as work. I just look at it as just pure enjoyment. And I can just walk out the back door to the workshop, and I don't have to battle traffic or anything like that these days. And want to stop for a cup of tea or coffee or something or other, you can do that, or put your head out the door and say, I want to mow the lawn today. You don't have to wait until the weekend or anything like that. So it's a good lifestyle.
And keeping your mind active, you're probably still finding ways to improve on some of those. Some of those
well,
parts.
I don't know why. It's just the way I've always thought. The brain never stops. Like, I'll sit down to have dinner and do a crossword or something like that. You've got to have the brain busy.
Ron, I can't thank you enough for making yourself available. It's so great just to sit down and listen to some of the great milestones that the business has had. Tim's an absolute pivotal part of the business now, and as a fourth generation, Tim's daughter Gemma even helps out occasionally, which is just wonderful to have that legacy. And we really couldn't be here without everything that Len and Elsa and yourself and the whole Harrop family have contributed. So sincerely grateful. It's been a pleasure to catch up, and we definitely need to get back together once you get this to the track. Hopefully by the end of the year, I'll be keen to see what it runs.
Okay, thanks Heath. No, it's been a pleasure helping you.
Excellent. Thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed the celebration of our 70th anniversary. We look forward to sharing more on Harrop's Howler when it gets to the track. We'll catch you next time.